Well, anyway, let's get into this tonight. What I want to do tonight is kind of pick up from where we left off last Wednesday. And before I get into that, though, I wanted you to just notice a very interesting timing. Pretty much everybody that's in this building is old enough that you've been around long enough that you have heard about these things, but I think it's good for us every once in a while to be reminded about them. Many of you will know that in May of 1948, one of the most astonishing prophetic fulfillments took place when Israel, after thousands of years, once again became a nation. According to the scripture, that would happen before Jesus came back. And if you lived prior to 1948, some people were not convinced that that was ever going to happen because for 2,600 years, Israel was not a nation. Matter of fact, when the Lord was here, walking on this earth, Israel was not a nation. But today, Israel is its own independent nation. That kind of set God's time clock into motion. Things that happen around that same amount time period is really amazing. For example, the United Nations came into existence. And many of you will know that according to the scripture, the Bible talks about a time, which we'll touch on a little bit tonight, where the antichrist will attempt to bring the world together as one. Another interesting thing that goes along with that is right around that time, the World Council of Churches was established. So you got three major events taking place just within months of each other. The World Council of Churches obviously was the introductory level to that one world religion that we'll notice when we get to Revelation chapter 13 and we're introduced to two beasts. The first beast is the antichrist. The second beast later on in that chapter is the false prophet. Those two beasts will attempt to work together to establish a control of the world. And this, of course, is one of the most obvious things when you're getting into the scriptures that you need to always be aware of is we're watching events take place before our very eyes. It should challenge us to keep on top of this. Now, if you were with us last week, we opened up with this interesting passage from Ecclesiastes. Solomon is writing the introduction to the book, and he says it this way: the thing that hath been, it is that which shall be, and that which is done is that which shall be done. And there's no new thing under the sun. Now that is quite an amazing statement when you think about it. When we're going to look at prophecy tonight, we can see what the future holds by sometimes seeing what has happened in the past. We all have heard that phrase, history repeats itself. That's really what Solomon was saying there. But another phrase that we've all heard is those that forget the past are condemned to repeat it. And as I showed you last week, there was a very interesting thing that took place under the leadership of King Saul and what King Saul was trying to do to the children of Israel and taxation and all the rest. Now tonight, I want to give you another example of this. But this time I'm going to go back to the Old Testament book of Deuteronomy, and Moses is telling the people here in chapter 17 the word of the Lord about what his desire is for the leader of his people. I mean, I think it's very obvious that God has a desire, not just in our lives, but he has a desire for us as a family. He has a desire for us as a nation. And his desire is to bless and to have his way, which is filled with blessings, but that doesn't always mean that's what happens. I think that God has a design for America. I don't think that he's thinking thoughts of destruction for America. I think that he thinks thoughts of blessing. But if America does not follow the way of the Lord, obviously we're going to be the one that gets the short end of the deal. And look at this passage, and I'll show you how this fits. As Solomon said, that which has happened is going to be repeated again. He says, when thou art come into the land which the Lord thy God giveth thee, and shalt possess it, and shalt dwell therein, and shalt say, I will set a king over me, like all the nations that are about me. Now, automatically, God says, you're going to eventually get your eyes off of my plan for you, and you're going to start worrying about how everybody else does it, and then that's going to be your standard for right and wrong. Not my standard, but you're going to follow everybody else's way. Then he says these words, thou shalt in any wise set him king over thee, whom the Lord thy God shall choose. One from among thy brethren shalt thou set over thee, that thou mayest not set a stranger over thee, which is not thy brother. So God says, I want you to understand, if you're going to do this, and this is what you want to do, I'll let you do what you want to do, but I'm going to tell you, do not set a stranger over you. And then he goes on to say, but, now here again, this is prophecy technically. Listen what he says. But he shall not multiply horses to himself. Now, God says, I'm going to tell you, here's what I don't want him to do. He shall not multiply horses to himself, nor cause the people to return to Egypt, to the end that he should multiply horses. For as much as the Lord has said unto you, you shall henceforth return no more that way. Neither shall he multiply wives to himself, that his heart turn not away, neither shall he greatly multiply to himself silver and gold. Now, folks, can I tell you, this is an insight that did not happen for many, many, many years later. Can somebody tell me who fits this description to a T? Solomon, exactly. Exactly what God said he would do. And if you've ever had the opportunity to go to Israel, one of the neat things, not too far from the valley of Megiddo, they still have the foundational stones laid there where King Solomon's stables were at. He multiplied horses unto himself. And one of the most obvious things that most people understood about Solomon was his multiplicity of wives and his wealth beyond measure. Exactly what God says, I don't want you to do. But I want us to take a close look at this because there's something really, really interesting about this. One of the things that God says, don't do this because his heart will be pulled away. Well, watch what it says here in 1 Kings chapter 11 as it begins to tell us about Solomon. Of the nations concerning which the Lord said unto the children of Israel, you shall not go into them, neither shall they come into you. For surely they will turn away your heart after their gods. Solomon clave unto these in love. God says, remember the thing I told you? This is the very thing that Solomon grabbed onto and hugged onto with love. Next verse says, and he had 700 wives, princesses, and 300 concubines, and his wives turned away his heart. Just exactly what Deuteronomy 17 just said. Once again, let me just say, God knows what is right, and God knows, but isn't it a funny thing that in the midst of all this, God still gives man choice? We can choose what we want to do. Well, it's interesting because the next verse says, and it came to pass that when Solomon was old, that his wives turned away his heart after other gods, and his heart was not perfect with the Lord his God, as was the heart of David his father. Now this is very important. Everybody listen to this and you'll see why toward the end of this message. For Solomon went after Ashtaroth, the goddess of the Zidonians, and Milcom, the abomination of the Amorites. One of the things that God says prophetically now, I don't want him to multiply wives unto himself because what they're going to end up doing, they're going to pull away his heart. And sure enough, it mentions that here, and it mentions Ashtaroth and Milcom. Now those are two very strong deities. These were goddesses and gods.